Hello, everybody. I don't really mind if you tune in tonight or not. I was going through organizing my pages and whatnot, and I noticed that I apparently skipped chapter 9, so I figure we'll get that in there so I can have a complete collection for book 1. So we'll get underway. I'm not going to talk through any of the other stuff I've been doing, just due to there's so much of it right now. See, chapter 9 is page 91. I'll get this done, and then I'm going to finish up what I'm working on and then go to bed. Chapter 9, Forging Bonds. The wind slapped against the sails, clapping the loose edges together. Birds chirped, collected along the top of the mast, looking down at the crew below. "Land ho!" yelled the watch from the crow's nest, his sight glass extended to peer through the low-hanging clouds. Gareth glanced up, noting the man's signal. Spinning to mimic his direction, he pulled his own sight glass from his leather pouch and extended it to get a closer look. The darkening sky made it difficult to see. "Drop the sails and bring her in slowly, boys. Looks like we got rocks ahead." The thick canvas fell with a thud, crumbling to the deck. The crew went to work collecting them for their next race. The ship rocked gently, gliding across the sea and the rocky harbor. Gareth stood beside the navigator, watching him spin the wheel. The ship slipped between the jagged boulders breaching the surface. Their size was remarkable, most of them twice as wide as the hull. There was no telling how large they actually were. The young captain glanced at the black liquid beneath them. It shimmered from the passing ship. He couldn't tell how deep it was, but if there were rocks, it couldn't be that deep. A resounding crash echoed below deck, shaking the ship violently. Gareth caught himself, unprepared for the sudden jolt. "Cabin boy, report the lower decks." A young boy, barely old enough to be called a man, took off below deck. Gareth looked over his beloved ship. He didn't need a report to know she was going down. The rails bowed already. It wouldn't be long before she disappeared beneath the black. He calmly walked to the overlook and peered down at his men. The boy rushed to the deck, looking up at the captain. He shook his head, sealing the already known fate. "Men, it's been my honor to be your captain, but those days are done. I doubt any of us can swim the distance to shore, and gods know what lurks in the depths. It's up to you, lads. You can stay here and drown or make a swim for it. Hope to reach the shore before the Dutchmen find you." Gareth finished his speech and turned to enter his room. It was customary to go down with your ship, and he intended to join his wife and son. The deck was chaos. Many of the men ran, jumping overboard. Some met their end upon the jagged rocks just below the surface of the dark waters. Others hit with a splash and swam for the faint outline on the horizon, disappearing long before they should have. Gareth dressed in his finest garb. He secured his armor and cutlass. Running a wooden comb through his thick red beard, he gave a final glance into the mirror, ensuring his appearance was sound. He was destined to meet his wife. There was no sense in being underdressed for the occasion. Solemn, he opened the door and stepped out onto the helm. Only a handful of men remained on board, preparing to meet their fate with their captain. They stood erect, offering salute. "May it be quick and painless." He returned the gesture, allowing his men to stand down. Marching to the wheel, he took hold, feeling it was his rightful place at the end. Water crept over the deck, covering the tar-sealed planks. The men cried silently, refusing to let fear dampen their mood. Clenched to their various religious relics, they stood defiantly, disappearing from sight. Gareth watched the sea swallow his men. It rapidly approached the helm, spilling over the top of his boots. He felt the icy chill of death on his legs, rising up to consume him. He was numb by the time the water reached his face. Time was lost. He needed to go quickly. He thought of his wife wearing her light blue dress and holding their infant son. With a smile on his lips, he exhaled, forcing the air from his lungs. The dark water covered his face, blocking out the fading light above. He looked around in the darkness surrounding him, letting the memories of his family claim his mind. Pipe smoke lingered in the air around the crowded tavern room. The collected noise echoed against the wooden walls, making more of a dull roar than a cohesive choir of voices. Ravion sat in the corner of the pub. His dark blue pants and tunic stood in great contrast to his tanned vest. His red-tinged hair hung loosely around his shoulders, swept back to display his forehead. He wore his father's longsword on his left hip with dagger sheathed beside it, tucked neatly beneath the table, but ready for use if required. He was still fairly new in these lands, but nobody questioned him. It seemed travelers were in steady supply in these parts. A barmaid approached carrying a bowl of stew and a wooden tankard of cider. She set the objects down and waited patiently for him to retrieve his purse. Where might one procure lodging for the night? Ravion handed her a couple copper coins and took a long draught from the tankard. The cider burned its way down, but it felt good against his throat. The frozen mountain winds hadn't helped him any. We have a few rooms available, though we're more suited for a brief stay. If you're looking for a week or more, you'd be going ahead to talk to Melvin. He's at the Inn of Aldridge. They average 1 to 2 silver less over a longer span. Ravion nodded his understanding. Thank you for the information. Waiting for her to leave, he spooned the hot steaming bowl, watching a strand of mist float away from him. He was hungry, but fairly certain it'd burn his mouth if he got too eager. Looking into the mixture of sauce, meat, and vegetables, he scooped out a rather large turnip. His nose wrinkled of its own volition. He scooped the plump mass out and laid it to rest in the saucer. I hate turnips. Ensuring no more of the dense vegetables remained, he reached across the table and grabbed a handful of dried bread the wench had set out earlier. Crushing the bread, he sprinkled the crumbs over his bowl and mixed the two into a semi-thick paste. Just a moment of pause there. If you're watching this, that turnips line is actually a subtle nod to my friend Christy Hart, who conveniently is also who I had edit my book, Damn It, Brie. In our D&D game, she had a character named Finlara, which will appear later on in these stories, who was obsessed with turnips. So as a subtle nod to her, I made a comment about turnips in here. But the patrons moved in and out, filling the room with gossip. None seemed to care who might have been listening. Many different stories echoed, each one having some slight bit of truth, as pub tales always seem to. Ravion spooned the paste, listening intently to the rumors. Having his feel on both counts, he stood and made for the door. The planked barrier swung open, allowing the cool fall breeze to barrage him. He was curious how such a simple device could have such a drastic effect. The chilling wind tore through his light fabrics. Shaking the shock away, he wrapped his cloak tightly around him and stepped out. He needed to procure a room and perhaps find some thicker clothes. These new lands were harsher than he'd grown accustomed. Survival would come from planning rather than simple intuition. Reaching the inn, he couldn't help but study the architecture. It was similar to the other structures of the area, but seemed more elegant in its design. The clay shingles were trimmed in wood and curved to deflect the wind and rain in a manner which he hadn't noticed on the other buildings. It was as if this one building was the foundation for the others, yet the quality dropped with each passing one. Passing through the single wooden door, he stood in awe at the interior design. Not so much as a chair was out of place in the common room. The walls were decorated with trophies of hunts long past. The fire was blazing with a chainmail curtain draped to prevent embers from flying out. A middle-aged man stood over the polished counter of the left wall, a thick book laid open in front of him, occupying his attention. Ravion approached the man. "Excuse me, is this the inn? What are your rates?" Excuse me, I'm assuming this is the inn. What are your rates? The man glanced up from his book, surveying the young-looking scout. Returning his attention, he spoke. 3 silver a week, 1 gold a month. Here's 3 gold. Can you tell me where the tailor is? Refusing to look up from his pages, the man reached under the counter and pulled out an iron key. With a thin chain linked around the backside. Laying it on the counter, he continued, "You'll be the second door on the right. Tailor shop 2 buildings north." "Thank you." Ravion snatched up the key and headed out the door. He looked down at his new garments. They were much heavier than he was used to. But once they were properly broken in, they'd function just the same. Throwing his thick black cloak over his shoulders, he secured the ties and stepped into the cool autumn air. "Well, I'll be here for a while. I suppose it's time to learn the lay of the land." Traveling with unnatural speed, he made his way north. following the occasional signpost along the roadside. Hero's Gate, he read silently. He hadn't heard much about the ancient passageway, but its name intrigued him. From what he'd learned about the landmark, it was the only known gateway in the ancient wall that split the country in half. Nobody seemed to know when it was constructed, but some claimed it was used to limit the number of forces able to pass during some unknown civil war thousands of years ago. He could see the outline of the massive wall long before the details came to him. Considering the stone structured tower towered over the trees lining the east side of the road, the term massive was putting it mildly. The iron portcullis took shape before his eyes. He couldn't tell how far away he was, but if such a structure was made to limit troops, it must have been one hell of a force to begin with. He slowed, hearing a commotion in the trees just ahead. Placing his hand on his father's sword, he stepped off the trail and into the forest. Carefully making his way forward, he froze, lost in the sight before him. A thick mist spanned in all directions, glowing white from the sun above. Dark columns stood alone in the enveloping fog, taking the form of massive trees. The lone warrior wandered aimlessly through the unending mist, lost as much in thought as in his solitude. Weeks had passed since he'd last sat in civilized company. His pack was light and his stomach rumbled from hunger. "Come on, Kane, it can't last forever." Forcing the doubts from his mind, he continued on. He was unsure where he was headed, but his instinct told him he was facing the right direction. The sun beamed brilliantly through the fog, reflecting against his chrome breastplate. A bright glare shot into the shadows of the misty undergrowth. It blinded him as much as it helped to see anything in the thick blanket. A thin black cape was attached firmly at the shoulder, serving more as decoration than actual function. The name of his mentor was carved into the collar of the freshly tempered steel, and a coiled dragon was inlaid across the belly, giving the smooth armor a textured feel. A sudden snap demanded his attention. He spun around, gripping the sword's handle, searching for the source of the unnatural commotion. He listened intently to the breaking twigs and crumbling leaves all around him, testing his sanity with the volume alone. It sounded as if it were right on top of him. But where, he wondered. Unable to wait a moment longer, he drew his greatsword and readied himself for battle. Standing defiantly, ready to strike down the first opponent to present itself, Kane searched. A huge shadow formed in the fog. It was 3 times larger than the average human and growing larger by the moment. He tightened his grip, stretching his fingers around the leather-bound handle, knuckles popping in protest to the pressure. The figure loomed, making its way closer to the offensive boy towering overhead. Kane felt his stomach tighten, watching it move closer with deadly purpose. The sound of leaves filled his head. He found himself wondering how big the creature's footsteps must be to make such a commotion. His heart raced, thundering inside his chest. His skin was sticky, pockets of sweat forming on his brow. Fear on edge, tempting him to flee, he trembled in uncertainty against the oversized shadow. Feeling he could take no more, his target sliced through the fog, presenting himself. A white rabbit with tan spots hopped into view, revealing its menacing presence to the embattled warrior. Lowering his sword with a chuckle, he let out a sigh of relief, watching the startled rabbit hop away, leaving him to his foolishness. Shaking his head, he continued through the fog, hoping to find a town soon. Hours passed and the mist began to thin, revealing an old dirt road with a weather-worn signpost stuck firmly in the ground. The tattered sign with carved words hung loosely from a single bent, rusty nail. He read the words aloud, listening to them as he spoke. Aldrich, 2 miles ahead. He glanced around, searching for the road's edge. Keeping them in sight, he set a path and made for town. The chirp of seagulls and crashing waves echoed along the coast between the forest to the east and the mountains to the west. Gareth awoke, feeling the water rushing up his body, threatening to cover him before receding back into the ocean. Opening his eyes, he was nearly blinded by the sun. Shielding himself, he rolled over and pushing to his hands and knees to see how many had survived the shipwreck. Rocky canyons towered on either side of the sandy beach, with the ocean on one side and a thick forest not far on the other. A large road ran the length of the forest, and a slightly smaller but equally traveled road cut into the dense woodland. Gareth surveyed the terrain, none of his crew in sight. He felt sorrow for their loss, most likely swallowed by the sea, yet he remained, as if the gods cursed him. He got to his knees, looking out to where his ship had been. He searched for the top of the mast, but couldn't see it. The water must have been deeper than he initially thought, despite the large rocks jutting out as far as the eye could see. Watching over the watery grave, he silently said his goodbyes. By Corin's grace, sail the eternal seas, my men. May your longing be at an end, and your hearth always warm. For the life of a sailor, while wet and cold, was one of exuberance and adventure. Many go their lives without really living. You, my men, did something many never will. You truly lived. Standing, he gave salute and turned toward the forest road. Reaching the top of the sandbank, he spotted a group of horsemen riding along the small road. They shifted and headed straight toward him. Gareth assessed the approaching men, unsure if they were friend or foe. They slowed, signifying their desire to talk. Close enough to make out details, Gareth looked them over. The first and largest of the group was adorned with a silver helm covering his face. It had a long tuft of blue fur flowing from the top. His tabard was blue and silver with a design across the chest. He wore a silver rapier on his left side with a beautiful dagger on the other. The man riding to his right was helmless and wearing similar garments, but instead carried a short blade on each hip. He was built for finesse, opposed to the brute strength like the other three behind them. The man on the left stood out from the first two. He wore heavy armor and a thick shield slung across his back. A warhammer dangled from the leather strap on his left hip. He didn't display the tabards as the others, but held a commanding presence nonetheless. The other two followed, dressed in silver and blue, but less commanding than the first three. The group slowly approached, urging their horses forward. The first removed his helm, revealing a mass of flowing golden hair. Greetings, friend. He was displaying a friendly smile for the stranded captain. Gareth waited a moment, studying the man's choice of word. As I've never met you, I believe the title of friend has yet to be earned, he stated coldly. The lead man looked the shipwrecked captain up and down, allowing a smirk to form. I cannot dispute your logic. However, as I do not know your name, it seems as fitting a title as I can muster to show you that we mean no harm. We only wish to assess your situation and offer aid. He paused a moment before continuing. My name is Master Remley de Leon, commander of the heroes and lord of Shadgul. This is my second, Sir Eric de Leon, he said, gesturing to the right, and my lieutenant, Sir Victitius Horvey, Sir Gemistray, and Sir Claude Irwin. He pointed to each of them. And you are? Gareth glanced over each one, measuring them in his own way. Returning his attention to the larger man with blond hair, he replied, My name is Gareth the Averon, captain of the Meriton, sadly resting at the bottom of the sea. We were a fishing vessel from the port city of Everick, off the northern coast of Nygold. The ship was lost among the rocks, my crew along with it. Not all. One of them was found wandering the road. He informed one of my soldiers of your ship not long ago. We dispatched to see if there were any more survivors. It seems you may be the last. But we'll keep looking. Gareth felt a slight joy hearing one of his men yet lived. Did you happen to catch the sailor's name? Ermley looked at the exhausting captain, feeling remorse for all he had lost. It seemed as though he'd suffered more than just his ship and crew. Something deeper troubled the man. Something that made him feel lost yet resolved at the same time. Yes, his name was Malachi Torn. He was taken to Shadgul City where he regained his stamina. From there he set out north to a town called Aldridge. Gareth looked upon the men. Thank you for the information. Would it be possible to barter a ride to this Aldridge so that I may find this man? I have little to offer due to Corin's need to sink my ship, but I don't mind working off the debt. May I repay service with service? Remley thought about the offer a moment, glancing over the man's appearance. He was exceptionally well dressed for a man washed ashore. His gaze locked on the blade resting peacefully in its scabbard. You any good with that? He gestured toward the bound weapon. Well, I've heard the pointy end goes in the bad guy. Gareth smiled, refusing to boast his prowess. It was too soon to trust these men. If they turned on him, it was best they underestimate his ability. Rimley chuckled. Very well, my friend. He paused at the thought, using the title again. I have a problem with a young dragon attacking the caravans on the road to Hero's Gate. Unfortunately, my men have been busy with more local matters. If you would agree to take on this task of slaying the beast, I would not only see you to Aldridge, but with a small fortune to pay your expenses and to accommodate you while you're in these lands. Gareth felt a small tremor of success hearing the matter of coin arise. I'll accept your terms. Rimley pulled a large blue bag from his waist and tossed it to the sailor. Jim, see this man to your saddle. Gareth climbed atop the horse and secured himself to the rider. They set off at a gallop, disappearing into the forest. Alright, another little interjection, because this particular chapter is where all of our heroes kind of meet each other. It's a fairly important chapter, and I'm really surprised I missed it, but the character of Rimley is based on a friend of mine named Daniel Woodmancy. In fact, Rimley is Daniel's character in my LARP group. Whenever I asked for his permission to put his character into the book, he had one request, and that was that I give him a head of golden flowing hair. So that's why Rimley has long golden hair. In truth, Daniel is bald. So anyway, back to the story. The fire cracked and sparkled, sending tiny sprites into the night sky. Several men laid about the fire, some lost in its dance, while others were fast asleep. The gallop of a horse echoed closer, halting just out of camp. A lone voice echoed in the darkness. Get off your asses and come take a look at this. The lowly human climbed from his horse and pulled a frayed burlap sack from the saddlebag. It was packed so tightly that the seams had stretched, threatening to burst open and spill out its contents. It hit the ground, ringing out like chain links. The others roused themselves and slowly approached. Heaving the bag with rushed small steps, he moved toward a crude wooden table hammered between a pair of trees. Coins and small trinkets spilled from a newly formed hole on the bottom. That's a good haul, Kelly. Where'd you get all this? A man with a wide scar across his face asked, watching him spill the loot out into a pile. I got a lead on a big score. This was the proof. There's a lot more. A whole room, in fact. He smiled smugly at the others, his superiority evident by his expression. They stared in awe at the amount of gold, silver, and gems resting on the weathered table. A large half-orc looked over their shoulders, admiring the collection. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes, hoping to get a better view. That a lot of loot. You planning to hit it tomorrow? The scarred man asked, waving the half-orc away. Go lay down. If we need something smashed, we'll let you know. The greenskin yawned, flexing his arms and back. Turning around, he sauntered off to his cozy blanket near the fire. Yeah, tomorrow's the best time. I'd hate for my informant to give the details to someone else and have them beat us to it. The scent of cherry floated in the air of the crowded pub. A dull roar echoed from the patrons, minding their own, while others laughed and joked with their companions. The room was lit from above by a large basin suspended from the rafters, and flickering flames spouted from the oil within. Kane leaned back in his wooden chair, listening to the legs creak with the unusual weight. He watched the sparks dance from the loaded fireplace, the occasional ember skipping through the chainmail curtain, blocking the fiery oven. He stretched his arms out to the side, flexing the muscles in his back, allowing it to pop several times before returning them and the front legs of the chair to the floor. The barmaid hurried over, careful to keep from sloshing the contents of the large wooden tankard. Setting it on the table, she waited expectantly. He fumbled with the leather binding of his coin pouch. Pulling it free, he snatched a small piece of copper from the bag and handed it to her. She's cute, but unlikely to have interest in me, he thought. She gave us a light bow, revealing a deep crevice at the top of her corseted blouse. A smile breached her lips, and she spun to return to her duties. Retying the pouch, he stuffed it back under his armor, making sure it found its pocket. Lifting the heavy mug, he sniffed the golden liquid, savoring the sweet scent. Placing it to his lips, he took a long draw. The taste of fermented honey filled his mouth. No wonder they call it the nectar of the gods, he said to no one in particular. Laying his drink to rest, two men stepped through the oversized door, catching his interest. They wore thick layered armor, mostly covered by matching blue and silver tabards. They marched across the tavern with purpose and approached the barkeep. Kane watched intently. One of the men pulled a rolled parchment from his pack and laid it on the counter. The other slid a small brown bag beside it. Judging from the shape and size, it was most likely filled with coin. The first one leaned over the counter, speaking a few words through the echoing voices behind them, none of which could be heard over the patrons. The barkeep nodded, breaking the seal and read the missive. The two men turned and left as quickly as they arrived. Feigning a long drawl of mead, Kane watched the barkeep pocket the bag and disappear into the kitchen. A few moments later, he returned with another scroll. He carried it over to a large board nailed beside the wall near the stairs. Tacking the parchment to the mass of existing bounties, the barkeep returned to the counter and started wiping the same area he'd been cleaning before. Curiosity piqued, Kane slammed the remainder of his tankard and wiped the excess away with his sleeve. Setting the wooden mug down, feeling the effects in his legs, he was careful to retain his balance as he approached the board and read the notice. Wanted notifications of criminals, heroes, or simple help crowded the soft wood full of pinholes. Even a few requests for ritual sacrifice or intimate encounters were posted. Kane reviewed the board, finding the newly tacked parchment. Attention, weary travelers. The road north is being accosted by a dragon. Any who attempt to travel to Hero's Gate should seek an alternate route. Any who wish to rid the world of this beast, be at the north edge of town by first light, tomorrow morning. Reward will be given for any who assist in the assault. The warrior read the message once again, ensuring he understood its meaning. He shook his head, clearing the fuzzy sight that was starting to plague him. Perhaps it's worth investigating, he thought. Rubbing his eyes, he turned to leave, but found his feet frozen at the sight of a stranger entering the tavern. The man wore brigandine armor with a short, curved sword on his hip. His head was freshly shaven. I'm getting tired if you couldn't tell. Freshly shaven, reflecting the firelight. He had a strange sense to him. It wasn't so much his appearance that halted him. It was something deeper, something familiar, yet unknown. Kane watched the man approach the barkeep. I need a room for the night. Gareth tossed his silver coin on the counter. He glanced around the room, locking eyes with a young man near the stairs. A strange glow radiated from him. It wasn't a solid aura. While that was rare, it wouldn't be the first one he'd seen. No, this man's glow was cracked and faint, like it both was and wasn't at the same time. This one truly was a first. The sound of metal sliding across the counter roused him. He glanced down, snatching up a small brass key. Refusing to delay a moment longer, he headed for the stairs, nodding to the young man as he passed. Am I done? Yep, I am. Alright, excuse me. Alright. Kane stood frozen, trying to understand what he'd just seen. Surely the mead hadn't made him see things. Shaking the thoughts from his mind, he made for the door. Glowing red men are too much for one evening. And if I'm going to aid in this dragon hunt, I'll need to prepare myself. A light fog had set in, hanging low in the sky. The bright moon glowed through, illuminating the lantern-lit streets. It was remarkably quiet, considering the number of people still out, but most of the population was indoors for the evening. Ravion passed the signpost, lost in his thoughts. It wasn't very big, little more than a juvenile, I'd wager. But still, it's too much for me to handle on my own. I need to find someone skilled enough to combat this beast, and preferably wealthy enough to pay me for it. Maybe if the man is gullible enough to believe the search was his idea, I can score an added bonus. He rounded the corner, hearing the first real commotion he'd heard since reaching town. Altering his destination, Ravion followed the shouts to the pub. Moving toward the doors to investigate, he jumped back, narrowly dodging the wooden barriers. A man flew headfirst through the double doors, landing hard on the dirt road. Small bits of dust flew into the air, coating his clothes. He groaned in pain and rolled over to find his feet. Ravion watched two men march from the tavern. One threw a sword belt on top of the man, while the other tossed a cavalier hat at him, spitting on the ground beside it. They turned and went back into the pub. Rough night? Ravion knelt down beside the man, extending his hand. You might say that. I've been shipwrecked, robbed, and now thrown from a pub because I caught a man cheating in a game of cards. Can't rightly cut him down, since it seems every man at the table was loyal to him. The man reached up, accepting Ravion's offer. I see. Well, there's always time for retribution another day. Come on, I'll get you a drink. Ravion pulled the man to his feet, snatching the hat out of the dirt and handing it over. The man took it, patting it off against his equally dirty leather armor and loose-fitting clothing. The stench of salt water radiated from him. Placing the hat atop his head, he grabbed the belt and tied it in place. Name's Malachi, by the way. Malachi Torn. Ravion Santel, he stated, giving a graceful bow, rolling his hand in kind. The two made their way for the inn. Taking a seat at the corner table, Ravion signaled the barmaid, laying a few coins on the table for her. She appeared a moment later, carrying 2 tankards. Laying in the rest, she snatched up the coin and disappeared again. So, I see you carry 2 blades. Safe to assume you're skilled with them? Ravion casually took a swig, sucking in much less of the liquid than he'd let on. Malachi grabbed the other mug and tipped it back. One might say that. I spent the majority of my life on the sea. Most recently I served on a fishing vessel from Everett. Interesting. Though I must admit I'm curious. What kind of fishing vessel requires a swordsman? It's a good question. We were a fishing vessel, though it's been months since we've caught any fish. Port we hailed from was attacked, leaving many of our families murdered. I was fortunate. My family died years ago. Didn't have to witness witness what much of the crew had. We set out in hopes of finding more of the creatures responsible. Maybe we could help some folks like no one did for my mates. But not all tales have a happy ending. Our ship ran into rocks a few days south of here. I woke up on shore near a forest road. Started walking and eventually ended up here. Been trying to decide what to do ever since. I'm lucky. He paused. Armor's rarely worn on a ship. It gets heavy when wet and tends to pull you down. Captain told us we were going down, so I dressed in my best, figuring it was my time. Laid down in my bunk, and next thing I know I'm lost, wandering aimlessly down the road. Ravion listened to the story, taking in the confusion and sorrow in the man's voice. He couldn't help but feel for him. Having shared a similar bond, it was always hard to say goodbye. Or worse, be denied a goodbye. But he'd never suffered a shipwreck. His departure from the sea was much more favorable. A bald man wearing brigandine armor caught his attention. He had an aura about him, reminding him of his own people. But this was different. This man couldn't be Dollar Eye. He didn't feel right. Gareth looked around the pub, spotting a familiar silhouette sitting with his back to the stairs. He had seemed to be in conversation with a young man, maybe in his early 20s, though he had much older stature. Not to mention the light blue glow radiating from him. He'd seen similar effects before. The man probably used some form of fancy magic, though he wasn't dressed as a typical caster. Ravion watched the man approach, locking his eyes. He raised a finger, cutting his companion off, preventing him from carrying on in the stranger's company. May we help you? Malachi glanced behind him, spotting the face of his captain. He jumped to his feet, nearly spilling his tankard. Without hesitation, he snapped a salute. Gareth smiled. It was good to see one of his men yet lived. Relax, Malachi. The ship's gone. I'm no longer your captain. Malachi dropped his arm, nodding respect to the stout man. You'll always be my captain, Captain. Resting his hand on the sailor's shoulder, he continued, I'm glad at least one of my crew survived, and I'm fortunate it was you. I'm in need of your tracking skills. I can pay for services, and your new friend here if he so desires. Ravion stood, extending his hand. Greetings, I'm Ravion Santel. And while I haven't been in this area long, I'm known as the finest scout for days. Doesn't matter who knows me as that, he thought. Gareth smiled and shook the tall, skinny man's hand. He felt a kinship to him, like he was familiar, yet unknown. Well, I'm going to go see if I can find a few men capable with a blade. I bid you gentlemen good night. I'll expect to see you on the north edge of town in the morning. We're tracking the dragons, so be prepared. Before they could ask anything more, he turned and made for the door. And that is the end of Chapter 9, which, like I say, I can't believe I missed it originally. Or maybe I did it and it just got lost. I don't know. But anyway, my collection's complete. If you want to continue the story from there, if this was your first time tuning in, the rest of them are on my Facebook page. You can find the entire first book there. And then I've already started reading book 2, so we'll do chapter 2 on book 2 Sunday. Maybe. I'll look. I have a book signing that day, so depending on what time I get home, I'll do it. But yes, have a good night.